Buongiorno a tutti, vi ringrazio di essere qui e, in questa iniziativa che abbiamo organizzato nell'ambito del dottorato internazionale Urban Regeneration Economic Development. Questa iniziativa fa parte di tutto il programma formativo che è stato organizzato, pianificato per il dottorato internazionale e abbiamo qui diciamo, il primo anno, gli studenti del primo anno, PhD students del primo anno, che seguono a Reggio Calabria dei moduli di insegnamento del network delle università straniere di cui il dottorato praticamente fa parte, con sede amministrativa ovviamente a Reggio Calabria e al Dipartimento PAU. E abbiamo qui il piacere ma anche l'onore di avere il professore Calavita che fa parte della San Diego State University, che fa parte appunto del collegio dei docenti del dottorato internazionale e anche il docente sostanzialmente del programma formativo del primo anno a Reggio Calabria. E il direttore del Dipartimento Paola, professoressa Martorano, che ci darà i suoi saluti e introdurrà sostanzialmente questi lavori. E il professore Nico Calavita farà una particolare, diciamo, lecture sul Community Planning and Development in USA. In pratica noi come programma formativo abbiamo questa multidisciplinarietà del dottorato che pone insomma, in evidenza le connessioni soprattutto tra il planning, l'urban planning nelle sue varie forme anche a livello internazionale, perché il community planning è qualcosa che noi in Italia non tanto utilizziamo, ma viene molto utilizzato negli ambiti anglosassoni, sia negli UK che in America, e San Diego, San Diego in California, diciamo che è una pratica molto attiva con come dire, delle esperienze che possono essere anche trasferite nel nostro ambito indipendentemente diciamo dal contesto normativo, ma come esperienza proprio di pratica, diciamo, di planning. E quindi siamo molto contenti di avere questa lecture del professore Calavita, che ha una riconoscenza, è riconosciuto a livello internazionale e ha diciamo un'esperienza anche di facilitator nelle forme diciamo di community planning nell'ambito sostanzialmente del processo decisionale nell'ambito appunto delle destinazioni o delle decisioni che vengono prese nell'organizzazione urbana e del territorio. Lascio un attimo la parola per i saluti alla professoressa Martorano e poi al professor Nico Caleano.
Voglio ringraziare la professoressa Carmelina Bevilacqua perché è attivissima organizzatrice di questo dottorato, è appena rientrata dagli Stati Uniti, e dare il benvenuto nuovamente quest'anno al professore Calavita. Il professore è una presenza costante, un riferimento per questo, per il nostro ciclo di dottorato, e io ho avuto occasione, lo voglio ricordare, di incontrarlo in una sede non istituzionale l'anno scorso, mentre mi trovavo in un castello tardo bizantino di Reggio Calabria, fuori, poco distante da Reggio Calabria, la fortificazione di Sant'Aniceto, e stavo guidando un gruppo stavo illustrando questa fortificazione a un gruppo di turisti, insomma, del Touring Club, a un certo punto vidi che si aggiungeva un altro ascoltatore e un ascoltatore attento, interessato, che mi rivolse anche alcune domande. Poi seppi che questo era il professore Calavita, quindi e mi ha fatto molto piacere perché ha dimostrato un'attenzione al territorio di Reggio Calabria, un'attenzione alle sue presenze storiche e un'attenzione attenta, non così superficiale da turista, insomma, del giorno. E a quest'anno lo abbiamo qui di nuovo tra noi, sta per concludere questo ciclo di lezioni perché come è anche stato poi attentamente pubblicizzato sul sito, è già da oltre una settimana che vengono gli studenti, possono ascoltare le sue lezioni. Ci tenevo oggi appunto a porgere i miei saluti anche per ringraziarlo di questa sua presenza e di questa guida che ci offre.
Ok, professore, allora iniziamo questa lecture in inglese, ovviamente, il linguaggio, diciamo, ufficiale del dottorato internazionale, se no non sarebbe internazionale. Ok,
Grazie.
la ringrazio tantissimo.
Grazie, e ricordo quel castello con molto piacere, proprio perché ho potuto capire la sua struttura, la sua storia, diversi particolari architettonici, fu un gran piacere. Molto spesso visito e capisco quello che posso, ma poi ho molte altre curiosità che non possono essere soddisfatte, invece in quel caso c'era lei, fu veramente meraviglioso. Devo ricordare che Francesco Cappellano mi aveva portato lì e sapeva che lei sarebbe venuta, quindi fu una bella
Un incontro, come dire,
combinata. Bene, quindi la classe, con gli studenti abbiamo parlato e anche visto un film molto bello su urban renewal and freeway construction in New York City from 1945 to 1970. And so now we are looking at the period after urban renewal. We'll talk a little bit about how it worked, but then we're going to look at what the consequences and the reactions were to urban renewal. So first of all, what is community development? And I'm distinguishing community development from general planning because community development is dedicated to low-income or moderate-income communities in American cities. And the purpose of a community development is asset buildings. What kind of assets? Well, physical assets such as buildings, roads, and public facilities. Intellectual and human capital. It has to do with the development of knowledge, of skills, and things of that sort, and confidence. Then we have the social and what we'll also call cultural capital, which has to do with norms, shared understandings, and the trust, which is really essential. When you're doing community organizing, community development, the trust among the different stakeholders is essential. Otherwise, you're going to be unsuccessful if there are hidden or obvious conflicts among the people in that particular community. Financial capital, we can understand what that is. Dollars. And then political capital. Political capital has to do with the capacity to exert political power. As we know, planning and urban regeneration all has to do with politics in terms of power sharing and in terms of making available, especially financial capital to revitalize particular communities. Okay, so by community planning, I refer to the process that leads to asset buildings. And it emphasizes resident participation. I don't say citizen participation because, especially in the US, many people, especially in those communities, are not citizens. So I will be strange to say citizen participation when many of them are not citizens. And so it's better to refer to it as residence participation. And so let's start, historic to look how this process of participation starts. So we have to start with urban renewal and the freeway construction, which went on in the 50s and 60s in the US. And the participation, or the call for the participation on the part of people was the result of those two programs. So let's see how urban renewal worked. First of all, just in short, urban renewal was a federal program which sent money to cities to do what was referred to as slum clearance. But the original intention was to create housing for people living in those slums. But in reality, very little housing was provided, and in fact created worse housing conditions. And the way it was done was at a top-down bureaucratic level, and the people, the power, the political power behind it is what a sociologist, two sociologists, but the main sociologist was Harvey Moloch, in an article called Growth Machines. He said that power in cities is not the corporations or the how do you say, the particular branch of a larger corporation in the country. That is not where the power lies. The power in cities lies in all those people who benefit from growth, from landowners to developers to architects, to newspapers and mortgage banks and so on. So and their purpose is to push for growth. And they were pushing for growth by renewing, to use the word, the downtown areas or some parts of the downtown areas. The other aspect of that particular process was that there was no community involvement. And as Le Corbusier famously said, the design of cities is too important to be left to citizens. And then the other aspect of the urban renewal program and freeway construction was the modernist design of or planning principles, super blocks, freeways, based very much on the car. And now we're all critical of those particular principles, but also we have to think historically about what the conditions were in terms of Paris, for example, where epidemics like cholera and malaria and yellow fever and tuberculosis were rampant, especially among the poor people in the city. By the mid-60s, urban renewal had evicted more than 1 million people, and most of them were poor people. So it worked, as I mentioned before, with cities designating a particular area to be urban renewal area. The people living in the urban renewal area would get a notice, which would say, you live in urban renewal area number 3. The building in which you now live is owned by the city of Boston. Now you have to leave. You have 30 days to leave. That was it. And it was not different when freeway construction was involved. So these are all, in quotations, what various writers have referred to urban renewal. The federal bulldozer, because it was federal money which made it possible for this to happen. Negro removal, because the great majority of the neighborhoods which were raised were inhabited by blacks. The blight that is right. Blight is the condition that an urban renewal area should have, which refers to physical and also social blight. But interestingly enough, or oddly enough, the areas which were chosen were not often the most blighted, but they are the ones which had a promise of return for the developers who would build on those particular areas. Another is the urban villagers. Herbert Gans, a famous urban sociologist, I've learned a lot from him. He went to an Italian-American community called the West End in Boston, and lived there for 6 months or longer. and analyzed this neighborhood which was slated for destruction. And he found that socially it worked beautifully. That it was like a village within the city. And the implication was that you should not destroy this particular village, but it was destroyed indeed because it was very, very close to downtown Boston. The title of a paper written by a psychologist by the name of Mark Freed was Grieving for a Lost Home. And the psychologist followed people who had lost their homes and where they went, and he found that they went through a process of grieving. Grieving is the word that Americans use when somebody close to you dies, and you're grieving for that, usually somebody in your family close to you, for his absence, for the loss. And that the people, especially older people who had lived, like probably the Italian older women in the West Village, they felt a similar kind of grieving for their home and village, because it was not just the home, it was the home and the neighborhood in which they lived. So there was a great deal of research which was being done during the 1960s about the destruction that urban renewal was creating. And also, it's not mentioned as much, but the freeways were also destroying hundreds of thousands of units and destroying whole neighborhoods. Sometimes the entire neighborhood, sometimes the freeway would come through a neighborhood, divide it in half, and then there was no connection between the two, and eventually these neighborhoods disappeared. In San Diego, a freeway, Interstate 5, went through adjacent to downtown, and it was an Italian community. And after the freeway, the Italian community basically disappeared. Also because they're becoming wealthier, to be fair, but that provided a spur for them to move in other parts of San Diego, such as Point Loma. So what happened? Well, people started to rebel, and advocacy planning was one of the outcome in terms of a planning model. And the main demand on advocacy planning was that residents, it seems obvious to us now, residents should have a say in the shaping and reshaping of their communities. We should also not forget that this time, if we can forget about planning and urban and all that, think a little bit historically about what were the 1960s in America especially, but also in Italy, in France, in Germany, and so on. It was a period of great upheaval. I mean, really. I was going to architecture school at the time, and I graduated in 1970, just as that was over. And it was the greatest experience of my life. Yeah.
The beginning of the so-called urban movements.
The beginning of, right, Manuel Castells and all the others. Yes, and maybe I missed some architectural design classes, but I learned so much more about the world, about politics, about people debating Trotsky versus Lenin. Who? That to me was new and opened a wild world. And the way I am politically is in great part due to that particular period in Florence. So in America, as you probably have heard, 1963, 4, 5, there were periods where there were riots in major American cities. I remember I was in a friend's house and the TV was on and there was the capital of Washington, the greatest country in the world. And there was smoke coming from behind the Capitol in a black neighborhood. That's incredibly shocking. Think about it. The place where the Senate and where the Congress of the United States meets, this incredible neoclassical building, and there was fire very close to it. And so there was a reaction, especially on the part of the federal government because of Democratic presidents, especially Johnson, Kennedy and then Johnson. So Johnson pushed for legislation at several levels, especially the civil rights movement. Until that time, there was segregation in the South of the United States, okay? This fountain is for white, this fountain is for blacks. We're talking about 1960s. And to pass civil rights was not easy, the Civil Rights Act. So this is a moment of tremendous change and tremendous upheaval. So the federal government, in reaction to what urban renewal had done, created an Economic Opportunity Act in 1964, which sent money directly to community organizations in the city, not through the cities or the states, directly to community organizations. And these community organizations, basically what they did was to make demands on the city's bureaucracy, which created all sorts of problems, like Mayor Daley of Chicago, you might have heard his name for the Democratic Convention at the time, went to Washington and says, what the hell are you doing? You're giving money to these people in these communities, and they're making more and more demands for services or of welfare payments and so on. But the important point, look at that quote, with maximum feasible participation of the residents. So the federal government is telling everybody that if there is any kind of federal involvement, monetary, legislative, or whatever, that the residents shall participate. So advocacy planning is the first, and being the first is sort of like a hit. You've been hit in the face, of planning, because it says there is no such a thing as an abstract public interest out there. There is not such a thing as an abstract public interest out there. There are interests of different people, and the people with power and money usually get their version of the public interest because they have the power and the money. So there is not a common public interest there. So the person who invented it was Paul Davidoff, a lawyer, and he wrote a famous article in the American, at the time it was called the Journal of the American Planning Association. So he pointed out the planners were really helping the powerful to design their plans and implement their plans, leaving out the people who were powerless. So it made an impression during the 1960s, even on the American Planning Association, and they have ethical principles. We have talked in the class about ethics, or no, we have not talked about ethics yet, but we have a chapter to read about ethics. And so the planners have principles of different types, and the ethical principle says that you planners, you should expand choice and opportunity for all persons. And so here in more details, it says, if you can read for yourselves. So that's pretty powerful. I don't know if Inu has anything of this sort.
Is it a question?
I'm just leaving it out there. It is a sort of a question. I say, I wonder. And if I say I wonder, maybe somebody can help and say, well, maybe not, maybe yes. But it will be interesting to find out if indeed they do.
They wrote actually a charter called La Carta della Partecipazione. I don't remember whether it's partecipazione or another word, but it's kind of like that. They wrote 2 years ago.
The public space.
No.
Another one.
What? I don't remember if it's with participation, like common goods, but I don't remember the name. Yeah.
That would be great.
It's kind of manifesto.
It'd be interesting to look at it. Okay, a little more about Paul Davidoff. Again, he was an attorney as well, a planning professor, and he did not just write about advocacy planning. He established a suburban action institute to fight exclusionary zoning. Does anybody know what is exclusionary zoning? How it works? Exclusionary zoning is was in New Jersey the practice by which localities will zone their land for 5 acres lots, or well, even 2-acre lots, or 10-acre lots. The effect of zoning your entire community for large lots means that only wealthy people can live there. So it's discriminatory, or it is exclusionary. So that led to a process which went,
Sorry.
yes,
Because in those zoning, certain requirements in terms of size of lots and the building requirements were enforced, and therefore only wealthy people could afford to develop and buy.
yes,
This is the trick.
yeah, because
Because of strict requirements about how you would develop, right?
yeah, 5-acre lots, it's a lot for single-family home.
Exactly. Okay.
So which only a single-family home will go there. Yeah, in the U.S. you say 5-acre lots, you think you're saying single-family home. Yeah, it means that only a single-family detached home can go there, and only wealthy.
To buy and develop
Right.
that size
Right,
of lot.
right. Thank you. So that also led to, I was saying that this is a process that led to 2 Supreme Court decisions of the state of New Jersey, which basically ended up saying that you, cities, you shall zone, and the words they used was to affirmatively make possible for people to come to live in your city. And the instrument that was used was inclusionary housing that I've mentioned to you in passing. Inclusionary housing is a program or legislation which says to developers in a particular city, when you build this project with 100 units, 20% or 15% or 10%, depending on the city, shall be affordable to low-income people. So you could call this a public-private partnership, but it's already mandatory. But what is important to remind ourselves of is that it is based on the market, on the real estate market. If there is no growth taking place in a particular place, there is not going to be inclusionary housing. So if a city is growing, and then you can do that. Then there is the question, which maybe we can discuss later, just to throw it out. Who pays the cost of that? Let's open this more in terms of not just a lecture, but also discussion. Who pays the cost of inclusionary?
The developer.
That's the first possibility. There are 2 more.
The recapture of the development, like a land value recapture, something like that.
Right. Because it's a little complicated. Because if the city says, well, first of all, let's say that it costs the developer money, right, in lost profits, lost gain. So it costs them money. So who pays for that? So one is that the city passes legislation for inclusionary housing, and the developer was talking to the owner of this piece of land, and the price was X. Then the city passes legislation, and now he can pay less for the land because now he has additional costs. He cannot pay as much for the land as did before, right? So there is a process of negotiation going on between the developer and the landowner, because again, the developer says, look, this is my additional cost. I cannot pay what we were negotiating. So it can be paid, actually, all economists, being the right or the left or the center, they all say that in the long run, it is the landowner who will pay for the cost of the inclusionary housing program. In the long run, meaning that it will take the land markets to adjust to the new regulations of inclusionary housing. Okay? So the developer can pay, the landowner can pay, who else can pay? The buyers or renters of the housing, right? Because the developer might increase. In order for him to recoup his additional costs, it might increase the cost of the housing, right? But all us advocates of inclusionary housing say, and I think it's obvious, that, well, the developer is charging the maximum amount possible in that particular market condition, right? Otherwise, it's a stupid developer. If I can sell this for $500,000, then I will charge $500,000. But I cannot say 600,000 because they are going to buy a house for 500,000 somewhere else. Nobody will buy my house. Does it make sense? So these are the three actors that can pay for the additional cost of inclusionary housing. The developer, especially in times of decline of the market, then he will need to sell the housing for a little less than before, so the profit will decline. The landowner, in the long run, because the land markets will adjust, and people say the buyer renters, but myself and others think that that's not actually true because the developer is charging the maximum amount possible at that particular time. Okay? So let's return to types of community planning. Equity planning. It was created by a friend of mine, Norm Krumholtz. We wrote an article together. In Cleveland, it was the director of planning many years ago, and he decided to work on behalf of, quote, that's a quote I use all the time that I think is so wonderful, for those who have few, if any, choices. For those who have few, if any, choices. So equity planning, you can read the rest. But he was director of the planning agency. Yesterday we were talking about risks, right? In class, we were talking about how far can you go in taking risk to advocate your position as a planner. And much of the discussion was about, will I lose my job if I do that? And will I have some money in the bank account when I take that stronger position? Maybe I should. And but he was hired, and what he did was basically put aside all the old planners. He hired about 10 terribly smart planners from Cornell, UC Berkeley, and so on, and they embarked on this program. And they did all sorts of wonderful things, such as more equitable distribution of trash pickup that at the time was not being equitably utilized. So all sorts of things which pursued that particular goal. So it's become the equity planning guy, and I look at myself as an equity planner. So what are the differences between advocacy planning and equity planning? So advocacy planners, they worked outside the bureaucracy. Equity planners work within the bureaucracy. And it's difficult in both cases, but especially difficult in case you work within a particular bureaucracy. In the case of Norm Krumholtz, he was working for a mayor who was supporting his agenda. It becomes much more difficult if you're an equity planner in a bureaucracy and you're the only equity planner or one of two, and you're pursuing an equity planning agenda in an agency which is just pursuing growth. That becomes even, much more difficult. Another type of, let's call it progressive planning, is environmental justice, which is, it's been around for a couple of decades. Because there is a great deal of injustice, I don't know if this is an issue in Italy as well, in terms of the dumping of course it's happened a little bit in Naples, but that was not an official, as a result of official decisions. But in many cases, these official decisions, where do we put this particular chemical? And well, we'll put it where people have no power and scream. And so usually they're dumped in those particular locations. Similarly, public housing that nobody wants. I was involved in a case in which this town south of San Diego called uh, a Latino inhabited community, which had become the dumping ground for public housing in San Diego. And the process was started by which more power was given. If you want later, I can tell you the story of that one. I will do it tomorrow in class. Health planning. Health planning is about 10 years old, and is becoming, I don't know exactly why, it puzzles me a little bit, as the kind of planning that everybody wants to do. In part is due to the idea that we should live in compact cities where people can walk, bike, and therefore we have to create cities which will allow that kind of behavior, walking, biking, and so on. In part is because there is an obesity crisis in the US, especially in low-income communities. For somebody who teaches history, it's sort of ironic, as I mentioned to the students, that planning really started in reaction to the problems that I mentioned before, the yellow fever, the fact that there were no sewer lines. Let's say, right away and clear, no sewer lines, and so which led to all these kind of diseases. So that the first support for planning in a climate of laissez-faire was, let's do something about the sewer lines, and then later water lines. So planning is source, really, origin is about creating a healthy city from that perspective. Now we have the sewer lines and we have the water lines, but we have this crisis of obesity, crisis of asthma in low-income communities. So problems which, in part, can be helped to be solved through planning and design.
I have a question about that.
Yes.
Because I read about this kind of a new trend in the plan. But do Americans like plan health planning with health insurance? I mean, if health insurance companies fund this kind of planning, they may save money and fund urban regeneration programs. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're not involved.
But
They could, yeah.
they could, but because they could have like a win-win strategy, because on one side you have health insurance companies saving money from people going there, but and on the other side you will have an urban regeneration, an urban neighborhood totally upgraded. But maybe you will say that.
No, what I'm going to say is that you're looking at a country, you look at the situation as if you had a social health system, right? Like this country.
Yeah.
So the fewer people go to the hospital, the more it saves. In US, the health companies actually make money out of people being sick.
Yeah, but they have to pay. I mean,
They have to
the health
do
insurance
pay, but they pay, but they make a profit out of all that process. They make a profit. They make huge profits, and there are all these fights. I get sick, and then I say I paid all this for curing my disease. They would say, well, actually, that was a pre-existing condition.
for this reason, for this.
No, there's many reasons. They're basically fighting you in order to pay less, and many people either have huge premiums, that you have to pay for your service, or they're negated. That's why Obama fought so much. He used a lot of political capital to pass what now is referred to as Obamacare, because it was incredibly difficult to do, and basically the health insurance companies are still there. And that's why Bernie Sanders is proposing a single payer program a la Canada, because it's still as old. I mean, if you could use the profits and the money spent in processing and challenging you about your cost and all that, you could provide a much better health system. Okay, now we come to the famous, at least for the planners, Sherry Arnstein's A Ladder of Citizen Participation. This was written in 1969, and she had seen all the sorts of planning that was going on during the 1960s, especially planning that had been sponsored by the federal government. And so this is the context. I'll talk about the context later. But he saw these 8 steps as going from manipulation, that you planners go to a neighborhood and basically know what you want as a planner. And you manipulate the neighborhood in order for them to accept that particular plan. So it moves on up the ladder in terms of more influence being provided for the community for which planning is being provided. All the way to the last step in which the citizens take complete control of the planning. It makes me think of Dudley Street, you guys also, in Boston. Probably one example in which the city gave this Community Development Corporation in Dudley Street the power of expropriation, the power of eminent domain. That's amazing. That is citizen control. But that's the only case I know of that power being given to a particular community development corporation. We'll return to the latter. So this is a consulting job I did in an area of San Diego called Southeast San Diego. And this area was inhabited by majority black population, and now it's very much a mixed population, especially Latinos, but also South Sea people from Samoa and so on. It's a wonderful place in terms of the mix of population, but extremely poor place, especially for the blacks. So I don't know if you can see that guy there. That's me, and it makes me think, I'm the expert. The way I'm sitting with my arms folded, looking at these 2 women who have gone through a process of preparing a plan, making choices, and explaining why they made those particular choices. But I was looking at the slide, I said, look at me. What I'm trying to say is that it was a wonderful process, and it started with me not being very much of a community planner, in a sense that one of the first meetings I was talking to a woman across the table, and I was speaking about alternatives, choosing alternatives and feedback loops and so on. And then the woman leans across to the table and she says, "What are you talking about? I don't understand what you're saying." So that was the best experience I could have had in understanding that when you're dealing in a community like this one, you have to change completely your outlook and the way you approach the community. And so, for example, during meetings, we would have a woman in the community that was, and I'm going to say, more educated, knew more about planning. If we were making a presentation and I would use a word, she knew that the people in the audience did not understand. She would raise the sign. So I'll be on the stage and I'll say, "Oh, what I mean by that is," because we have our own jargon we use all the time. I'm using it now a lot. I'm sure that if people came who were not part of our community, they could not understand much of what I'm saying. So that's just a small example in terms of, and I want to go back to that later, of how difficult it is to work in these particular communities. So experts see, but you still remain the expert. There's still a gulf between you and the community. And the trick is, or the difficulty is, how you bridge that gap. And it's not easy, because you're talking about somebody who has been a planner for many, many years, and people who have not. I remember we had exhibits of an aerial photo, and this woman and this other woman were looking at it, and one of them said to the other one, you see, said, imagine that you're flying high and you're looking down, and this is the way it would look like. She had never seen an aerial photo. Okay, these are the kind of difficulties working in these communities. In San Francisco in 2000, the Mission District was being overrun. There was the .com. I don't know if you remember. You okay? Let's say you're 30. This was 16 years ago. You were a teenager. You know. So .com was a burst of stock markets and a burst of seeking places to live and live workspaces and so on. So there was a great deal of displacement taking place. So there was this coalition that was put together. And so the city wanted to prepare a plan for this area and asked the community to work with the city. And the community took the position, no. We want to prepare our plan first. We don't want to be influenced at all by the process. Let's define as a community what we want, and then that becomes our point of where we start negotiation with you, the city. This is a process that I could talk for half an hour at least about. But what I found interesting that these people, in a country which doesn't know about la rendita or the recapture of land values, they had in their program that when you give higher zoning values to developers, the value of the land increases and we should get something back out of it. I was absolutely floored. I was amazed that they had done that. And they did. So what's happening today, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is not the end of the presentation. I decided that we should take a break. but just to say that the federal government still calls for participation and consideration of the effects, in this case, of transportation projects like freeway construction or road construction or transit construction, that they should involve the communities being affected by this fully, and that they also should pay very much attention about the effects, the negative effects they might have on that particular community. Okay, I didn't want to go on for 2 hours, but it's not really 2 hours. But so time for, yes.
I don't know if this is going to be the second part of your talk, but I'm wondering, there was a leap in between the beginning of this community approach to planning and to this notion of regeneration as opposed to renewal in the late 60s and 70s. And then you jump to the Euclid Plan 2002. I am curious, even very quickly, to learn what happened in the 80s and 90s. Reagan's administration, and then neoliberalism, fully deploying in the 90s. Because I'm very ignorant and familiar with the community part, but then the advocacy planning and the equity planning and all this movement, which has its own branch in Europe. But I don't know what happened in the 80s and the 90s in the United States. Federal governments, local governments, planners, theory, practice.
I have a slide presentation on that, which we can come back tomorrow, and I can give you that one. I do talk about that, but very briefly, as part of a larger discourse about still equity planning, more contemporary. But I'll wait until the end when I give a short summary of that. Yeah. So I'm going back to the towers in the park, because this leads us to regional equity planning. Design principles, we know about Jane. How many people don't know about Jane Jacobs? Okay, so this is a picture of Jane with her walking stick, con il suo bastone, and Rob Moses, and as we know, and the students have seen a long movie about the battle between the two of them, that Jane Jacobs eventually won when Robert Moses was proposing a lower Manhattan expressway, and at this particular time, the people or the residents were able to stop him. The power broker. That was the title of a book written by, it was interviewed several times. He said, I was about to interview Moses, and he said, so that was Robert Caro. The book is about this big a book.
Beautiful book. It
Yeah.
really explains how it works.
So Jane Jacobs, it changed the way we think about urban spaces, and I think you know all these. I love especially the last one because it's become even more current because of more and more people wanting to live in cities, especially what we call millennials, because of the kind of synergies that happen within cities. So Jacobs' thinking led in a strange way to two approaches which wanted to bring back the city as it always existed. So one was Andres Duany and his wife, Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg. They were architects. I put it there in big because they were architects. The planning profession in this country was born with two main figures. One was a landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted, and the other one was an architect, Daniel Burnham. But then, especially after urban renewal, that part of planning disappeared. That is to say, that looks more at the physical environment. It was more policy oriented. And now we start going back to the physical environment. And the other, Mr. Andres Duany was on the East Coast, and he started in Florida. And then on the West Coast, we have another person, another architect by the name of Peter Calthorpe. And with him, we have this beginning of the idea of a TOD. Initially, it was called the pedestrian pocket. So the idea is that you have like a string of pearls. You might have heard this before. String of pearls, and each pearl becomes your center, connected by the string, which is the mass transit system. And you have the higher density next to the mass transit station, and lower densities you move out. And then that it became the idea of TOD, which is conquer the world. And one of the conquerors is Francesco has done his dissertation on TODs. And he knows much more about TODs than I can possibly do. So again, the idea is that center is transit and densities become lower toward the end. This is an interesting slide because it shows on the lower left there the original plan for this area. In red there, what you see is curvilinear streets, cul-de-sacs. And we discussed in class that cul-de-sacs are liked by developers and the people because they provide a safe space for people for children to play and so on. But it's not very conducive to walking or biking, but especially walking. So that was the original plan for this area. And then Peter Calthorpe designed this alternative, Laguna West, which is near Sacramento, which I visited. I was not particularly impressed. Because still the feeling of suburbia. It's rather low density, and the public facilities are, an elementary school, a little shop, and a little park. So not the excitement that we are all seeking, I guess. You see the parking also all the way to the back. That's parking. But also you have this 3 avenues leading to its focal point. So in a way, it's neo-Baroque on its. And then cities started asking Peter Calthorpe to go and develop some kind of guidelines for TODs, for them to do TODs. And you see the date is 1992, and much has happened since then. Also, if you look at the picture of Francesco, doesn't look like a transit-oriented place. I mean, it looks like a road with parking on the sides and some one-story and two-story buildings. I was looking at when I was preparing for this, I said, couldn't they find anything better? But that was 1992. And also it was very much focused on suburbia, to restructure suburbia, or to accommodate growth in suburbia. And now we have moved more toward smart growth. And then there are a hierarchy of smart growth. You have the urban, what is called? The urban TODs. You might have the more local TODs, and then you walk to the local TODs, you get to on the bus, or you can walk if you can, and there you get to the mass transit system. It can take you to the city, and there is open space in between, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what it was proposing. So TODs are the building block of smart growth. What is smart growth? You can read it there, more compact form, and you limit sprawl at the edge of the metropolitan area. You reorient the transportation system to lessen the use or discourage the use of automobiles and cars and encourage the other forms of transportation. You also create an open space ecological element. Ian McCarr, you remember Ian McCarr who designed this Design with Nature, he said, green belts are wonderful, but they don't really look at what is desirable to preserve and what is something that can be developed. They just become a green belt. And this is what especially has happened in San Diego, is that you've had a process which has cost millions and millions of dollars and years into making, which is designated particular areas as being ecologically important, which, through various mechanisms, shall be preserved. So that becomes, in a sense, the boundary line for the metropolitan area of San Diego. Not with a line which says you can build up to here and not build here, but basically by creating these corridors of open space, which are ecologically, they've been designated as such because of ecological preservation reasons. And so on a regional scale, San Diego is doing well in terms of preserving large open swaths of open space and preserve species both at the animal and the vegetable level. And then there's the infill redevelopment aspect. So revitalize existing communities through infill densification. Okay, infill means that if you have some areas which has not been built on, then you build there. And densification means that one-story building or two-story buildings you tear down and you rebuild 4 or 5 or maybe high-rises, depending on the particular situation. And also in optimizing existing public facilities, the idea is that you might have capacity in the sewer lines, in the water line, in the parks and so on, which we have discovered is not necessarily true. Okay, these are some slides which I think they were created for SANDAG, the regional planning agency for San Diego, to see how these corridors with one-story buildings with 5 or 6 lanes of cars can be redesigned to create more development, more density, and that can accommodate also a mass transit system. An example of a TOD in the Bay Area where I live, and it's Fruitvale. This process took many, many years. It's not easy to do these kind of things in which a large portion of the housing is affordable. It's obviously walking distance to the transit station, and 5 minutes to Oakland, and Oakland is 10 minutes from San Francisco.
Is that picture affordable housing?
Yes.
Good quality.
Let me tell you about housing. The stories are that you are an affordable housing advocate. You go to a city and you talk to the city council and say, we want to do some affordable housing. And everybody says, absolutely not. We hate housing for the poor. You know, we have seen public housing. Can we have a bus tour? Okay, so you put all that on a bus tour and you go and look at affordable housing projects in the region. They come back and they say, yeah, we want affordable housing. Because it's very well designed, very well built. I'm sorry to add, very expensive to build. And so it's going to last because it's made with very good materials. That's an explanation why it's so expensive. and the quality is excellent. The only problem is there are not very many, and there are lists of people waiting in line to get on lists for housing that are. I was reading an article about this non-profit housing developer built a 84 unit project, and they had 12,000 people on the list. Okay, problems with smart growth and TODs. Actually, I think we should have a 5-minute break, right?